And you have probably heard people saying that an interview is a numbers game, but very few people understand the implications of this statement. Because a numbers game doesn't mean indiscriminately sending out CVs. It means that there are limits to what you can control, and that there are things that are simply outside of your control. It all comes down to this final video. Learning, practicing, demonstrating lay the foundation for the next and final step, which is applying for a job. Because there are so many moving parts, I will go over the topic at a higher level while leaving with some good insights, which will be explored again in later videos. The entire process can be roughly divided into 3 major steps. The first one is preparing your CV, the second one is preparing for the interviews, and the final one is looking for a job and applying. Let's begin with preparing your CV. If you are just breaking into cybersecurity, chances are your CV is not really interesting, mostly because you don't have professional experience. In this series, because the name is Breaking into Cybersecurity, I will assume that you are a blank slate in terms of professional experience. And under such circumstances, your CV will most likely consist of one or more of the following: academic degrees, training and certifications, research projects, for instance on blog, personal blog or GitHub, CTFs or labs, bug bounty programs, internships or volunteer work, relevant hobbies, for instance public speaking, and come on Bruno, come on. Cover letters. I find cover letters to be an absolute stupidity, but because you are starting your career now, everything counts. So you should really prepare a tailored cover letter when you apply for a job. Because let's be honest, anything that helps you stand out from the crowd will put you ahead of the crowd. There is one thing missing in this list, which is attitude, a good attitude. As you start in this field, and this happens with every field, you have a lot to prove as a junior. And this means that you are going to have to work extra hard, not only at work, but also outside work. A genuine good attitude shown throughout the interviewing process is going to be a major selling point for you. And here I must emphasize genuine because it's a really bad idea for you to try to fake this interest in cybersecurity or this attitude. Because at some point the mask will just fall and you are going to be caught. And that's the last thing that you want happening to you. Trust me on that. And because preparing a CV, it's a long topic and there are many guidelines that I have to give you, here I'm just going to give you a few. The first tip that I have for you is add an introduction or a summary at the top of your CV about you. And this introduction and summary should talk about your professional experience if you have it. If not, it should talk about your practical experience. For instance, any labs that you have been through, any challenges, any CTFs, and also any research that you have done in the past. Or GitHub projects. It should include also areas of knowledge and interest. What do you know? What is your area of expertise? What is the area that you understand the most? It can be pen testing, it can be cloud security, it can be reverse engineering. And also what areas interest you the most. They tend to be the same as your areas of knowledge, but not necessarily. You may like pen testing a lot, but your area of expertise is more cloud security. Finally, you must describe why you are a good fit for this position. Remember that this is the first thing that a recruiter or hiring manager is going to see when they are reading your CV. It is therefore important that you really manage to sell yourself there properly by explaining what do you know, what you like to do, what have you done in the past, how do you spend your free time, for instance with projects, and finally, why do you feel that you are a good fit for this position? Why should they hire you? The second one, and this is a really important one, is a CV is about impact and not facts. It is easy for you to talk at length about all the things that you have done in your previous company, all of your day-to-day tasks, all the projects that you worked on. But the most important thing is selling what you have done before. For instance, how have you improved the security posture of your previous company? Have you managed to cut down costs? Have you managed to improve the performance of your team? Have you managed to reduce the churn rate of your team? Your objective in your CV is to highlight your impact. But some of you are probably saying, but I don't have any professional experience, Bruno. How can I highlight my achievements and my impact? In this case, because you are still at the learning phase, you probably took a couple of courses, You probably went through a couple of CTFs, or maybe you are part of a bug bounty program. In that case, what you can do is you can explain the reasoning behind some of your decisions. Why have you decided to take this course? Why do you feel that this course is going to advance you somehow? How has this course or this certification or this bootcamp has changed your life as a cybersecurity professional? It doesn't have to be anything dramatic or in detail, but it should explain the recruiter your thought process. Because you shouldn't be the kind of person that just takes certifications left, right, and center, as most people actually do. Always explain why you do things in your CV. The third tip I have for you is less is more. It's not uncommon for candidates to clutter their CVs with unnecessary mentions to frameworks, tools, certifications, courses, and perhaps online labs and challenges that are not really relevant to their CVs, at least in the context of the job they are applying for. Never forget that the CV should be tailored to the job you are applying for, and you should highlight the skills, the projects, the certifications that you have taken in the past or you are still taking that actually benefit you somehow and make you a good candidate for this specific position. Stick to the relevant skills, tooling, and job functions, and just leave the rest out, because a cluttered CV, it's hard to read. And you know what happens to CVs that are hard to read? They are just passed over. I have interviewed many candidates, and for me, it's sometimes really hard to force myself to go through a CV that is just bad and it's really hard to read. The only reason I tend to do it is because I don't want to miss a good candidate, because he just doesn't have good selling or presentation skills. But not everyone is like me. Most people and most recruiters are way too busy to waste their time with a CV that is just poorly formatted and with a lot of information. Just leave unnecessary information out. The last tip I have to give you is probably the most important, which is don't lie, embellish. There is nothing wrong with framing your skills or your previous position, your tasks, in a way that shines a good light on you. But there is a big problem when you lie about the things that you have done in the past and your skills. At some point you are going to get caught, even if you are hired. And that is going to be even worse, because then your reputation is stained. You become the kind of person that lies on their CVs and then they cannot really deliver. Avoid lying in your CV. The second step is preparing for the job interview. And here I should actually say preparing for the job interviews. Have you heard the expression, if you fail to prepare, you are preparing to fail? Interviews must be prepared in advance to avoid surprises and to show the person that is interviewing you, be it someone from human resources or a hiring manager, that you are a reliable professional. Now, the number of interviewing steps ranges from 3 to 6 typically, and the number of steps and the structure of the interview depends heavily on the structure of the company and the culture. For instance, if you are applying for a threat research position as a threat research lead, you may actually be interviewed by the manager, which happens to be the manager of the machine learning team, because you are going to be integrated in the machine learning team, even though your manager may not have a lot of experience from a security perspective. Assuming 3 steps, we usually have 3 distinct stakeholders involved. The first one tends to be someone from the human resources team. And this person is going to interview you from a personality and fit perspective, not really diving deep into technicals, which tends to be part of the next and subsequent phases. The second person is the hiring manager usually, and the hiring manager can be, for instance, a SecOps lead or a cloud security lead, but he can also be someone that works in the team that you are going to hopefully be part of, and this person is quite senior or really experienced to the extent that they can actually interview you technically. For instance, one of your potential colleagues. The last person is going to be the manager. And here I say manager because it really depends on the structure of the company. If you are applying for SecOps position, you may be interviewed, for instance, by the SecOps manager. However, you may also be interviewed by the VP of security if you are interviewing for a startup, for instance. Now, this last interview is slightly similar to the first interview to the extent that it's not deeply technical. Here, the manager may ask you, for instance, what are your motivations to leave your current company? Why do you want to join us? Why do you want to join this company? What do you love about cybersecurity? And one that is quite interesting, and I've been asked this before, is what are your plans for the first few months after joining? And this person may be the person that you report to when you join the team, especially if you are in a senior position. As you increase the number of interviews, the start and the end tends to be the same. In the sense that usually the first interview is with someone from human resources, while the last one is with some sort of manager. Now, the in-between can vary, and depending on the company, you may have, for instance, a technical challenge or challenges, which can be take home or live, where you need to solve a problem live through Zoom call or maybe Google Meet call, where the person interviewing you is asking you questions and you need to, for instance, write a small script in Python. You may also run into a behavioral or cultural interview. And finally, another possibility is that you may be interviewed technically, but not only by the people from your team, but by people from other teams in security as well. This is the kind of thing that you'd see in big companies like Google or Facebook, where if you are applying for a SecOps position, they may bring someone from threat intelligence, perhaps forensics, to ask you and bombard you with questions to test your security skills from different angles. Now, regardless of the step or the number of steps, you should prepare yourself for questions across the following topics. The first one is CV. Your CV is probably the most important tool, or at least one of the most important tools to sell yourself. And as such, this is going to be target of scrutiny during interviews. A hiring manager or someone from human resources may ask you to explain your CV, to summarize your CV and summarize your professional experience up to the point of the interview. And this may mean that the person actually didn't read your CV, but it may also mean that the person just wants you to explain how you would sell yourself. How do you summarize your experience in a way that is relevant for the position you are applying for? Other questions that they may arise are job hops. Why are you job hopping every 1 year, which is something that you should avoid, or every couple of months? And another one is gaps. Why have you decided to stop working for 3 years after you left your job at, say, Microsoft? This is something that is definitely going to be asked about during the interview, and you must be ready to explain. Another one is personality. You may be asked if you are okay working in a team or if you prefer to work alone. How do you manage stress? How do you manage conflict? These kinds of questions are definitely going to be asked either by the human resources representative that talks to you on the first call, or perhaps the hiring manager later, or maybe the final manager that interviews you. So you should be prepared for questions like this. Another one is motivation. Why do you want to switch positions? Why do you want to move to this company? Why do you want to move to this specific team? These are really relevant questions that are asked usually by someone from human resources, or perhaps hiring manager or a final manager that you interview, because they want to know what is your motivation. And I don't want to go deep into this topic, as I want to talk about it at some point, but I'm going to just give you with a tip. Avoid shallow justifications such as I want a raise or I need more money. And I know that in interviews ideally you should be honest, but if you are jumping from one job to the other, you should really have a solid reason to do so. And jumping just because you want more money, it's maybe a good reason, but it's probably not the best reason to present when you are asked such question. Something to bear in mind. Tech skills. This one does not really require an explanation. You are going to be asked about technical topics, about your area, about what you have done before, how have you done it, and if you have experience for the role at hand. Depending on the company, you may have a culture fit interview where the person interviewing you wants to understand if you are a good fit for the culture of the company. These are usually personality interviews where they ask, how did you handle stress in the past? How have you handled, for instance, a conflict with a toxic colleague or a toxic manager? And usually there is no right or wrong answer for questions during these interviews, but they are going to try to understand if your thought process is something that resonates with them and the culture of the company. And I know that some of you are really technical and you are just focused on the certifications and programming and perhaps offensive security, but these interviews are really important. And this is the kind of interview that can ruin your chance of getting a job because you said something that was not really nice. And finally, the $1 million question or the $1 million topic, which is salary. When you are interviewing, especially on your first interview, you are going to be asked about salary expectations. It is just going to happen. It's as sure as taxes. And once more, it's really important for you to prepare in advance. This is the kind of topic that is enough for another video. I'm not going to dive deeper into this, as there are some techniques that you can use and some things that you should avoid saying. But suffices to say that you really need to have a number or at least a range in mind. Interview processes can be quite long and tiresome. And you are going to find out about this soon enough, as soon as you join cybersecurity field. And the biggest problem is that a lot of times they are not really fair. You may be rejected for reasons that are, for the most part, out of your control. But I believe that you should focus on things that you can control. There are two tools that you should develop that can give you a massive leg up. The first one is an inquisitive mind. Ask a lot of questions. Most candidates approach the interview process with the wrong mindset. They assume that they are supposed to be asked questions. They are supposed to be silent and just wait for the interview to end. They approach it as they approach a test at school, a math test at school, or perhaps an exam at the university. And this is simply the wrong way to go about this, because at the end of the day, this is a mutual relationship. This is the same as you going on a date and sitting there waiting for the girl or the guy to ask you questions and not asking any questions at all. And then you find yourself in a relationship with someone that you don't know anything about. The same applies for a job. Never forget that once you get that job, and assuming that you get the job, you are going to spend most of your days, several months definitely, and perhaps a couple of years working for a company. You are giving away your free time in exchange for money, it is true, but it's still your free time. Is this the best company to work for? Have you asked all the questions? Do you understand what you are getting yourself into? Most candidates really don't, because they don't ask the right questions. So ask a lot of questions. Most recruiters don't expect candidates to ask any questions at all. So when you show up with a lot of questions, deep questions into the dynamics of the company, into dynamics of the teams, how the teams cooperate with each other, what is the environment, what is like to work for this specific company, they get really surprised and they actually appreciate it, because, deep down, people like to answer questions and they feel that you are actually interested in the position in the company and you are not just applying hoping that you'll get lucky. The second weapon is a journal. Most candidates show up for the interview. Not only they don't ask questions, they don't take any notes. This means that after the interview, they completely forgot what happened, and there are some answers that they gave to certain questions that they will never be able to reuse on other interviews because they don't remember them anymore. A good thing about interviewing a lot is that you start seeing patterns. You realize that recruiters, hiring managers tend to ask the same sorts of questions, the same types of questions, sometimes even the same question or perhaps a different flavor of the same question. If you keep these logs and if you keep notes on all of these interviews, you may actually be able to answer questions on other interview processes, or you may actually learn something new during an interview process that then you can showcase in another interview process. Don't forget to keep a journal of all your interviews, because it is one of the most important things that you can do that is going to really give you a leg up. The final step is looking for a job and applying. And how can you tell if you found the right job if you don't know what you are looking for? And I know that as a beginner, as someone that is trying to break into cybersecurity, you just want a job. You just want to land any job. But this is not the smartest way to go about it. And you have probably heard people saying that an interview is a numbers game. But very few people understand the implications of this statement. Because a numbers game doesn't mean indiscriminately sending out CVs. It means that there are limits to what you can control, and that there are things that are simply outside of your control. But if there is anything you can control, is how targeted you are with your search. As you expand your job search, two valuable and limited resources are going to be affected. One of them is time and the other is morale. Time because you are going to spend most of your days and perhaps months trying to land a job by just spamming every possible online form with your CV, with your cover letters, or even spamming recruiters on LinkedIn. As for morale, facing accumulating rejection is going to really hurt your self-esteem. what is going to end up happening is that you are going to become one of those people that complains online that they have applied for 1,000 jobs and they still don't have a job or even an interview. Let me tell you something. If you apply for 5 jobs and you get 3 interviews, you are onto something. But if you apply for 1,000 jobs and you don't even land an interview, you are doing something wrong. This is something that you really need to get through your head. The higher the number of rejections, the more likely that you are making a mistake. You need to stop and you need to think about it. You need to really take an honest look at what you are doing, the process that you are following, your CV, the people that you are sending your CV to, and the positions that you are applying for, so that you can learn before you start applying again. So before you even start applying for a job or even searching for a job, you should bear in mind a couple of factors. The first factor is the size of the company. Do you prefer to work for a larger company or for a startup? Larger companies tend to hire specialized people. They have teams for everything. They have the forensics team, they have the threat intelligence team, they have the SecOps team. The SecOps team doesn't do any forensics, that is the role of the forensics team. They don't do any threat intelligence because that is the role of the threat intelligence team. And the same for reverse engineering team, depending on the size of the company. Now, startups are quite different. Startups tend to be understaffed and they tend to be, but not necessarily, sweatshops. It's the kind of place where you are supposed to wear multiple hats. You are perhaps the junior, you are the senior, and probably the manager and the lead at the same time, especially if it's a smaller company. And you are expected to be able to handle any type of work. Usually it's related to the area that you are working on, which is security, but it doesn't mean that you are just going to close alerts. You may be asked to work on cloud security projects, perhaps working on data pipelines, perhaps supporting the deployment of EDR sensors across the fleet. These are completely different environments and you must decide which one do you prefer in advance. The second factor to have in mind is what are your skills and what are you passionate about. If you have studied security operations and you have taken a few courses and you just don't like it, why are you applying for a job as a security operations analyst? I've heard this a lot of times that the best way to get into cybersecurity is by joining a security operations team, and that may be true, but do you really want to join a team and do a job that you just don't like, you don't see yourself being there for too long? Of course, sometimes that is the smartest choice. You may choose this first job as a stepping stone to get ahead and to move to some other team in the future. But before you do this, before you choose the easier way out, try to apply for something that you like. If you like pen testing, apply for pen testing. If you like cloud security, study and apply for cloud security positions. Even if it's a junior and quite underpaid position, just take it. Never apply for something that you don't see yourself doing for the next couple of months or next couple of years. It's just a bad idea. Third factor is job structure. Do you prefer structured job or do you prefer unstructured job? Are you the kind of person that is okay with order, or you are the kind of person that prefers chaos? And here there is no right or wrong answer, because some people are okay with less structured work. They don't want to be told what to do. They just want to be given a complex task, for instance, build a team or build this project, lead this project, and they are okay with taking the lead and working by themselves, of course, with some support and guidance from other teams and other co-workers. While some other people prefer structured job. They want to have specific tasks, they want to have a to-do list, something that they can follow and that they can check as they finish the tasks. This is a very important question, and I'm going to definitely go over this at some point in another video, because these are completely different types of personalities and you really need to figure out what kind of person are you, because the worst thing that can happen is you being, for instance, a person that requires order and structure, starting a job at a startup where there is no team, there is no documentation, there is no guidance, and you are just thrown in there and you are asked to say, okay, now build a team from scratch or lead this project, and you have no experience or guidance whatsoever. That is going to be a really stressful point in your life. You are going to learn lessons, definitely, but if you can avoid this situation, why not avoiding it? Now, the final factor I want to talk about is company reviews and salaries. And this type of information can be found on websites like Glassdoor. Now, it is true that some of these websites may be a bit questionable, but if you look at the reviews of a company and you see a lot of red flags, a lot of bad reviews, a lot of criticism towards leadership, perhaps a stressful work environment, a toxic work environment, this is probably a company that you should avoid. Now, it is true that companies are made of people, and where there is people, there is drama, there is disagreement, and there is clash of personalities. So it is a fact that you are going to always find bad reviews on any company. But if these reviews are quite common and they are widespread, especially across departments, which is something that you should really pay attention to, then you should probably move on and choose another company. Because the last thing you want to do is join a company that is toxic. Now, I have to say that I've been blessed throughout my life because I've never been part of a company that was toxic in any way whatsoever. And even though some of the companies I worked for, they actually had some bad reviews on departments that were not mine. But still, you shouldn't trust that everything is going to be just fine. Make your research in advance. In terms of getting your CV in front of the right people, say the hiring manager or someone from the human resources department, there are essentially two ways. The first one is the classic online submission. You apply like everyone else, you go to the LinkedIn website or you go to the website of the company that is posting a job spec, or you can go the least traveled path, which is connections. Now, if you recall from my previous video, I mentioned that you as a person, as a professional, you are a brand. And one of the attributes of a brand is competitive differentiation. Now, with the classic application methods, this idea is completely thrown out of the window because you are with the herd. You are basically applying the same way everyone else is applying. There is no differentiation factor for your application process. And for you in this case. In the defense of the first approach, I will say that all the jobs that are on my CV were jobs obtained through this approach. However, I've had other opportunities of interviewing for other companies that I ended up not taking a job, either because I was not qualified or I just didn't want the job in the end. And these interviews were obtained because I had a friend or an acquaintance that worked for that company. And that means that my CV was put ahead of most candidates because it was a recommendation from a person working for the company. And this is probably the fastest way to expedite the interviewing process and get you in front of the right people. Another advantage of having someone inside the company that can recommend you is that if there is a new opening and this opening is not being announced on the company's website or perhaps LinkedIn, you may be informed about this position earlier and have inside information because you have someone working there. It is quite easy for us professionals to go about our lives thinking that the interview process is dependent mostly on technical skills and cool projects, but the harsh reality is that knowing the right people is what opens many doors, especially when you are starting and you have no proven track record. And we have reached the end of this mini-series, Spartans. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed producing it. And I'm sure that at this point you are prepared for what I'm going to ask next. Don't forget to leave a comment below with feedback. Tell me what you liked and what you disliked about this mini-series, as any feedback, as you know, is more than welcome. Until next time, stay safe, stay paranoid.